I managed to collect 160 strange historical photos that you might have missed. Write in the comments which photo you liked the most. In 1923, jockey Frank Hayes suffered a fatal heart attack while racing at Belmont Park. His horse, Sweet Kiss, crossed the finish line first with Hayes still in the saddle, making him the only jockey to win a race after death. In 1959, New York police beat and arrested Miles Davis outside Birdland after he refused an order to leave the club where he was performing. A detective struck his head from behind, leaving him bloodied in the suit shown here. Josephine Baker prepares backstage at Vienna's Johann Strauss Theater in May 1928 during her revue Black on White. Only 21, she had already escaped American racism and become one of Europe's most famous performers. This 1918 family portrait shows adults and children wearing masks during the deadly Spanish flu pandemic. Even the cat appears to have its own tiny mask, turning a grim public health measure into a bizarre historical snapshot. Alice Elizabeth Doherty was born in Minnesota in 1887 with hypertrichosis, which caused thick hair to grow across her face and body. Her parents began exhibiting her at local fairs when she was only 2 years old. The United States Navy gunboat Nipsic sits in a floating dry dock at Honolulu in August 1889. Months earlier, she survived the deadly Apia cyclone by beaching herself, while 6 other warships were wrecked or sunk. Alice Cooper married dancer Cheryl Goddard in Acapulco on March 20, 1976, after meeting her during his stage show. Their marriage survived his severe alcoholism, and they remained together for 5 decades. In the early 1950s, contortionist Renita Kramer stunned cabaret crowds with her famous ostrich dance. Her bent body formed the bird's back, while a long fake neck and feathered costume completed the bizarre illusion. In 1859, Charles Blondin became the first person to cross Niagara Gorge on a tightrope. He later repeated the crossing blindfolded, rode a bicycle across, carried his manager, and even stopped above the gorge to cook an omelet. In October 1944, a German shell tore through the B-17 Little Miss Mischief, yet its wounded crew regained control by splicing broken wires. The bomber crash-landed in England, received the rear half of another B-17, and returned to combat just 40 days later. Watari Handa was an Imperial Japanese Navy fighter ace credited with 13 victories during the Second Sino-Japanese War and the Pacific War. Before his death in 1948, he said he could never forgive himself for losing Saburo Sakai's wingman at Lae. In 1958, 12-year-old Freddie Mercury, then known as Farrokh Bulsara, posed with a sports trophy at St. Peter's School in India. There, classmates began calling him Freddie, and he formed his first band years before becoming Queen's legendary frontman. In 1894, Annie Kopchowski left her husband and 3 children after barely learning to ride a bicycle. 15 months later, she returned claiming to have circled the world, won a $20,000 bet, and survived a robbery, though much of her story was likely invented. In 1965, England goalkeeper Gordon Banks made an unusual save by catching a dog that ran onto the pitch. He won the 1966 World Cup and made the legendary save against Pelé in 1970. But a car crash ended his career after he lost sight in one eye. Around 1950, these women posed at Atlantic City's segregated beach in New Jersey. Known as Chicken Bone Beach, it became a celebrated gathering place for black visitors and stars during segregation. At just 21 years old, Andre the Giant showed off his enormous hands on a beach in France in 1967. He already stood over 7 feet tall, years before becoming one of wrestling's most famous stars. Philadelphia, June 1943. Natalie MacDonald worked at an Atlantic refining company garage, keeping cars running during wartime. Women like her filled essential jobs as millions of American men served overseas. These Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters were found near Tokyo in late August 1945, days after Japan announced its surrender. Once feared across the Pacific, the aircraft now sat grounded as American occupation forces arrived. 13-year-old Kurt Russell poses with Bob Denver while filming Gilligan's Island. Russell played a mysterious jungle boy in the episode that aired on February 6, 1965. American soldiers pose in Vietnam in 1968 with California and Confederate flags. The Confederate symbol was carried by some troops as a sign of Southern identity, even as the civil rights movement exposed its deep connection to racism. Yugoslav partisans captured this Italian M15/42 tank near Medvode, Slovenia, in May 1945. Built for Mussolini's army, it ended the war loaded onto a train among other captured Axis vehicles. Barney was an American steer born with 2 extra legs growing from a hump on his back, the result of a parasitic twin. His unusual body saved him from slaughter, and during his early 1990s tours, he calmly ignored the crowds and ate hay. In 1957, nurse Nulchawi Petrung met Dr. Athap Suyansethakarn at Tobacco Hospital, and they began a relationship. She did not know that Athap was also involved with other women, including one of his students. In 1988, Katharine Hepburn was photographed shoveling snow from the roof of her New York townhouse. The 4-time Oscar winner was 81 years old and did the hard work herself. In June 1939, a Japanese Nakajima E-8N reconnaissance floatplane flies ahead of a larger Kawanishi E-7K above the clouds. Allied forces later gave these aircraft the code names Dave and Alf, but both were designed to launch from warships and search vast stretches of ocean. This is the empty Louvre wall after the Mona Lisa was stolen in 1911. The painting vanished for over 2 years, and police even questioned Pablo Picasso as a suspect. Robert McGee was 14 when Sioux warriors attacked his wagon train and scalped him in 1864. He survived, but the deep scars left the natural seams of his skull clearly visible beneath the skin. This footage shows lodge owner Harry R. Truman on May 15, 1980, after he refused to leave Mount St. Helens. 3 days later, the eruption buried his lodge beneath hundreds of feet of debris and sent Spirit Lake surging 800 feet up the surrounding slopes. In 1969, exhausted New Year's Eve revelers fell asleep on a moving escalator inside Grand Central Terminal. Some still held their party hats, while strangers used each other as pillows during the slow ride. Sonny Liston shows off his massive fist, which measured 15 inches around and helped make him one of boxing's most feared punchers. His hands were so unusually large that finding gloves that fit him was reportedly difficult. The Nakajima Ki-43 Hayabusa was a highly agile Japanese fighter that Allied pilots called Oscar. Its light design gave it exceptional maneuverability, but early models lacked armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, making them dangerously vulnerable to enemy fire. Willie and George Muse, brothers with albinism, were kidnapped as children and forced to perform in sideshows for 18 years. Their mother Harriet never stopped searching, finally found them, and helped them regain their freedom. 2 harbor workers wear traditional Klepbroek trousers in Volendam, Netherlands, in 1904. Their enormous shape allowed fishermen to move freely and stay warm, while the wide front flap made the trousers easy to open with cold, wet hands. In 1929, Vivian Bales posed with her new Harley-Davidson before leaving Albany, Georgia, on a 5,000-mile journey. She rode through 14 states and into Canada, proving that women could handle the same dangerous roads and powerful machines as men. A young Ute hunter poses with his dog around 1900, carrying a bow and arrows while wearing elaborate beadwork. The image preserves a striking record of Ute hunting culture as traditional life faced rapid change across the American West. In 1944, B-17 Flying Fortresses of the 303rd Bomb Group flew through exploding German anti-aircraft shells over Merseburg. The city's synthetic fuel plants were so vital to the Nazi war machine that American crews repeatedly attacked them despite devastating defenses. In 1916, Lady Florence Norman rode an autoped through London, a birthday gift from her husband. This early motor scooter reached about 20 miles per hour and was controlled by its steering column. A black American soldier poses with his partner in a Pittsburgh studio around 1943. His uniform captures a striking contradiction. He served a country whose military remained racially segregated throughout most of the Second World War. On August 14, 1971, France detonated the Rhea thermonuclear bomb 480 meters above Mururoa Atoll. Its 955 kiloton blast was about 64 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. These Anglo-Indian siblings were photographed in Bangalore during the 1950s after British rule ended, but before their family moved to Britain. Thousands later left India as jobs, identity, and their place in the new nation became uncertain. USS Washington sails off New York on August 21, 1942, with a Kingfisher floatplane visible behind her. Less than 3 months later, this battleship would destroy the Japanese battleship Kirishima in one of the war's deadliest night battles. During the First World War, an Italian front soldier described guard duty at 3,000 meters as being a sentinel of nothingness. Surrounded by snow, fog, and deadly cliffs, sentries faced avalanches and frostbite as often as enemy fire. Rwandan Patriotic Front rebels carry a rare South African Milcor grenade launcher during the Rwandan Civil War between 1990 and 1994. Its rotating cylinder fired 6 40mm grenades before reloading, giving a small unit devastating firepower. William Bill Arbuckle was 27 when German fire brought down his Hellcat during a low-level attack on a military convoy in southern France on August 20th, 1944. Local villagers recovered and buried his body, promising on his headstone never to forget the American pilot who died for their liberation. This NASA and United States Air Force Lockheed YF-12. A could fly above 3 times the speed of sound at nearly 80,000 feet. Built as a secret interceptor, it later helped NASA develop technology used in future supersonic aircraft. In 1880, legendary French actress Sarah Bernhardt posed in a full bronze diving suit, turning dangerous equipment into theatrical fashion. Her taste for shock was real. She kept a coffin in her home and sometimes slept inside it. In 1947, young shoeshine boys in New York paused work to eat hot dogs beside a street cart. The 10-cent sign on the box shows how little they charged for each shine. In 1958, New York police officer Richard Perry practiced basic Spanish by writing English sound clues on a blackboard. The lesson broke down "Cómo se llama usted?" word by word, helping officers ask Spanish-speaking residents for their names. On April 15, 1975, South Vietnamese refugees crowded onto a small boat near Saigon and approached an American warship for rescue. 2 weeks later, Saigon fell to communist forces, ending the Vietnam War and triggering a mass exodus. In 1973, a Khmer Republic soldier bathes inside a defense perimeter beside Highway 5 at Sala Lek Pram, Cambodia. Behind him stands a French-designed AMX-13 light tank, built with an unusual oscillating turret and automatic loading system. On July 8, 1956, the United States detonated the Red Wing Apache nuclear device from a barge at Eniwetok Atoll. Its fireball released the force of 1.85 million tons of TNT, exposing the surrounding islands to radioactive fallout. George W. Coe, a former Lincoln County regulator who rode with Billy the Kid, was photographed in 1934. He lost his trigger finger in the Blazers Mill gunfight in 1878, later received amnesty, and spent his final years ranching in New Mexico. This boy is Victor Emmanuel III, photographed in the early 1870s wearing an elaborate royal costume. He became King of Italy in 1900 and later handed Mussolini the power that transformed the country into a dictatorship. Ajit Subbarayan, directs his camera crew across a miniature stadium while filming Ultraman in the 1960s. His team used monster suits, tiny buildings, and clever camera angles to make television battles look enormous. In 1915, an entire airplane was hauled through snowy Tykaka Street in Białystok, Poland. Its wings had been removed, so the massive aircraft could squeeze between buildings, carts, and overhead wires. In 1886, this Nebraska family lived inside this covered wagon while searching the Loup Valley for land to claim as a homestead. Everything they owned traveled with them, packed behind 2 horses across miles of open prairie. Jacqueline Kennedy and President Lyndon Johnson stand at the White House before John Kennedy's funeral in 1963. Minutes later, she walked behind his coffin through Washington, following a ceremony modeled on Abraham Lincoln's funeral. At the Jamaican Pavilion during Montreal's Expo 1967, a uniformed police officer buys a souvenir from a vendor. The fair welcomed more than 50 million visitors, giving newly independent Jamaica a massive global stage just 5 years after it left British rule. Francis Clifford Smith was sentenced to the electric chair at age 24 for killing 68-year-old Grover Hart during a robbery in 1949. His sentence became life imprisonment, and after 70 years behind bars, he was released on parole in 2020. At 11 in the morning on May 9, 1910, Lewis Hine photographed 3 young newsboys smoking in Skeeters Branch, St. Louis. Hine used images like this to expose the harsh lives of working children and help drive child labor reform. In 1935, future Western star Alan Ladd posed beside his enormous Cadillac on the Paramount studio lot in Hollywood. Years before becoming famous, the 22-year-old actor was still struggling to land major roles. French officer Jules Brunet defied orders to return home and helped train the Republic of Ezo's army during the Boshin War. Beside him sits Matsudaira Taro, vice president of the short-lived Republic, which was defeated by imperial forces in 1869. In 1980s Poland, an entire family gathers hay by hand while a horse waits beside an overloaded cart. Chris Niedenthal captured how children joined the exhausting fieldwork during the final decade of communist rule. 1 month after Britain entered the Second World War in 1939, children in Birmingham practiced wearing gas masks during an air raid drill. The smallest masks were designed to look less frightening, but every child was being prepared for a possible poison gas attack. John Harrison Simpson was only 15 when photographed after joining a Union cavalry regiment in Tennessee. He survived being trampled, captured, and imprisoned, then escaped death again when the Sultana exploded in 1865, killing more than 1,000 passengers. During the First World War, soldiers tested steel helmets, breastplates, and face guards that looked like medieval armor. They could stop shrapnel and some bullets, but their crushing weight made running, crawling, and fighting in narrow trenches dangerously difficult. In January 1945, an American helldiver roared past the aircraft carrier Hornet during strikes in the South China Sea. These dive bombers attacked Japanese ships and airfields while facing heavy gunfire and some of the war's most dangerous carrier landings. On Okinawa in April 1945, Japanese troops hid a Type 97 hand grenade inside a cabbage to create a deadly booby trap. The grenade could explode when a hungry soldier picked up what looked like ordinary food. Broadgate, Coventry, after the German air raid of November 1940, when much of the city center was destroyed. The Owen Owen department store survived as rubble burned around it, but unexploded bombs later forced its demolition. This cracked statue at an abandoned children's camp near Moscow depicts Vladimir Komarov, the first person to die during a spaceflight. In 1967, his Soyuz 1 capsule crashed after its parachutes failed during a landing. Captain Andrew Turner and Lieutenant Clarence Lucky Lester stand beside their fighter at Ramitelli Airfield, Italy, on August 1, 1944. Just 2 weeks earlier, Lester had destroyed 3 German aircraft in one mission, becoming one of the Tuskegee Airmen's most successful combat pilots. Around 1923, a Selknam mother carried her son through the freezing forests of Tierra del Fuego in a thick fur cloak. Martin Gusinde photographed them after ranchers, disease, and forced displacement had already devastated the Selknam population. On September 29, 1942, a soldier inspected the grave of a German tank crew killed when their Panzer III was destroyed in the western desert. The wreck still stood behind the grave, surrounded by ammunition, equipment, and debris from the fatal attack. In 1949, HMS Revenge and HMS Royal Sovereign were cut apart at Inverkeithing after surviving 2 world wars. Royal Sovereign had only recently returned from Soviet service, where she sailed under the name Arkhangelsk. Retreating German troops blew up Budapest's chain bridge in January 1945, leaving only its stone towers standing. The rebuilt bridge reopened in 1949, exactly 100 years after its original completion. In 1912, workers moved a massive slice of a giant sequoia into the American Museum of Natural History. The tree was cut down in 1891 after growing for more than 1,400 years and reaching about 100 meters tall. This giant is a 27-ton Bell AZ 540A quarry truck driving through Moscow in 1966. It appeared during a motorists' festival, towering over buses, cars, and pedestrians on an ordinary city street. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy stands at the far right with the crew of PT-109 in the Solomon Islands in 1943. Weeks later, a Japanese destroyer split their boat in two, and Kennedy swam for hours while towing a badly burned crewman by a life jacket strap held in his teeth. These 2 Soviet-Mongol soldiers fought for Nazi Germany before being captured in France in August 1944. Thousands of Soviet prisoners joined German units to escape starvation and brutal prison camps. But capture by the Allies could mean forced return and execution. During the First World War, Austro-Hungarian soldiers, including Sandor Ivanch, posed beside a massive wild boar they had killed between 1915 and 1917. Hungarian handwriting on the back preserved the names behind this haunting wartime hunt. King Mongkut of Siam posed in Western-inspired military dress in 1865, wearing royal decorations while holding a sword. He studied Western science and opened Siam to foreign trade, helping the kingdom avoid European colonization. In August 1944, life photographer Ralph Morris captured an American soldier walking with a local woman in newly liberated Chartres. Their smiles reveal a rare, peaceful moment after years of German occupation and the fierce battle to free the city. In September 1945, a United States flight nurse checked on wounded soldiers packed into bunks aboard a military evacuation plane. These nurses treated men during dangerous flights, turning cramped aircraft into life-saving hospitals in the sky. A British soldier inspects a massive unexploded shell among the ruins of Whitshitey, Belgium, on August 11, 1917. One wrong move could have detonated the dud, making this casual-looking inspection a deadly gamble. In 1962, heavyweight champion Floyd Patterson faced Sonny Liston, the feared contender many top boxers had avoided. Liston crushed Patterson in just 2 minutes and 6 seconds of the first round, taking the world heavyweight title in one of boxing's most brutal victories. German forces bypassed the Maginot Line through the Ardennes in 1940, making France's massive defenses nearly useless. Japanese military observers later toured the captured Schonenburg fortress with German officers, studying a system defeated without a direct assault. In 1915, 14-year-old Grand Duchess Anastasia Romanov captured this striking mirror selfie with her Kodak camera. Just 3 years later, she and her entire family were executed by Bolshevik guards. A native Hawaiian surfer carries a solid wooden board in the late 19th century, when surfing was far more than a sport. After missionaries condemned Hawaiian customs, surfing nearly vanished before native writers helped revive it. These public health workers disinfected London streets during the 1870s after a devastating smallpox outbreak. Their hand cart carried chemicals and equipment through crowded neighborhoods where poor sanitation allowed deadly diseases to spread rapidly. This is Maff, Marilyn Monroe's beloved Maltese, a gift from Frank Sinatra. After Monroe was found dead in August 1962, Sinatra's secretary, Gloria Lovell, took Maff into her care. In 1902, these workers were carving a New York subway tunnel through solid rock beneath Central Park. With limited machinery, crews drilled holes, packed them with dynamite, and removed the shattered stone by rail cart. This is Abraham Lincoln in 1860, clean-shaven just months before he was elected president. Soon after, an 11-year-old girl urged him to grow a beard, saying it would help him win votes. This is Florence Lawrence, often called the first movie star, who appeared in nearly 300 films. She also designed early mechanical turn signals and a brake warning sign, decades before these safety features became standard. In 1921, Marie Curie faced a wall of cameras aboard the ocean liner Olympic as she arrived in the United States. She came to receive 1 gram of radium, bought with $100,000, raised by American women. In 1892, Alexander Graham Bell opened the first telephone line between New York and Chicago. He called Thomas Watson, the same man who had heard Bell's first successful telephone message 16 years earlier. This is the start of the 100-meter race at the first modern Olympics in Athens in 1896. American Thomas Burke shocked spectators with an unusual crouching start, then won the final in 12 seconds. In 1964, Otto Frank returned to the secret annex where his family had hidden from the Nazis. He was the only one of the 8 people who lived there to survive the Holocaust. This is Seoul in 1910, shortly before Japan officially annexed Korea and ended centuries of Korean rule. The city was soon renamed Keijo, while Japanese authorities seized land, controlled schools, and tried to erase Korean language and identity. This is Adolf Hitler at age 10 in 1899, decades before he became one of history's most infamous dictators. That same year, his family moved to Liaoding, where he spent much of his childhood. During the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, nurses in Massachusetts treated patients in outdoor tent hospitals. Doctors believed fresh air and sunlight could slow infection, a method that reportedly helped some patients recover. On August 13, 1961, East German forces sealed Berlin streets with barbed wire and concrete blocks. Families were split overnight, and anyone trying to cross this new barrier risked arrest or death. In 1886, Madagascar's last queen, Ranavalona III, posed beside her husband and prime minister, Ranelagh. He had married 3 queens in succession and held real political power, but France later seized the kingdom and sent the royal family into exile. This 1896 photo shows 17-year-old Albert Einstein seated at the lower left with graduates of the Cantonal School in Aarau, Switzerland. The school's unusual focus on independent thinking deeply influenced the future physicist. In 1977, 1,200 London schoolchildren formed a massive line for a record-breaking game of musical chairs. They smashed the previous world record of 1,006 participants. This man is modeling a bizarre suit designed to protect its wearer from radioactive fallout after an atomic attack. Strangely, the supposed survival gear was made from Italian silk. These student chefs turned a metal trash can into an oven during a simulated survival exercise after an atomic bombing. Their grim task was to prove that hot food could still be prepared when kitchens, electricity, and normal supplies were gone. In 1932, German aircraft designer Max Wiedenhoft tested this bizarre rocket bicycle on the roof of Berlin's Tempelhof Airport. Rockets behind the rider reportedly pushed it to 108 miles per hour, and Wiedenhoft believed it could replace small airplanes. In the 1940s, these women programmed ENIAC by manually connecting thousands of cables and setting switches. They helped turn the room-sized machine into the first general-purpose electronic digital computer. Yet their work went largely unrecognized for decades. Two workers take a smoking break on an Eagle gargoyle 61 floors above Manhattan during construction of the Chrysler Building in 1929. These steel ornaments were modeled after Chrysler hood decorations, turning the world's tallest building at the time into a giant advertisement. In 1940, a woman at London Selfridges examines luminous flowers designed to glow during wartime blackouts. These unusual accessories helped pedestrians and drivers spot people on streets kept dark to hide the city from enemy bombers. In 1947, Londoners drank tea by candlelight as a severe coal shortage caused frequent power cuts across Britain. The crisis closed factories, darkened homes, and turned this ordinary cafe meal into a striking image of post-war hardship. Mounted police hold back a huge crowd outside the New York Stock Exchange during the Wall Street crash of 1929. In just 2 days, stocks lost about $30 billion, more than the United States spent during the First World War. This rare 1865 photograph shows Mongkut, the king of Siam who welcomed Western science while ruling an independent kingdom. His tense relationship with British teacher Anna Leonowens later inspired the famous musical The King and I. In 1886, Gottlieb Daimler fitted a four-wheeled carriage with his compact gasoline engine, creating one of the world's first automobiles. Unlike earlier steam vehicles, it used a high-speed internal combustion engine and could reach about 11 miles per hour. In the late 19th century, tourists climbed the Great Pyramid with local guides, gripping stones that rise higher than a person. The dangerous ascent was once a major attraction, but climbing the pyramid is now strictly forbidden. In 1926, the Sydney Harbor Bridge was rising from both shores without support from below, while steamships still crossed the busy harbor. Workers built each half of the giant steel arch outward, held by massive underground cables until the two sides finally met. Construction of the Eiffel Tower began in 1887, with workers building 4 massive foundations to support its iron legs. Despite fierce protests from famous artists, the tower was completed in just over 2 years. This rare photograph from around 1850 shows Charles Dickens with his wife Catherine and 2 of their 10 children. 8 years later, their marriage collapsed, and Dickens publicly portrayed Catherine as an unfit wife and mother. This is Vladimir Lenin in 1917, wearing a wig and posing as a worker while hiding from Russian authorities. Using forged papers under the name Konstantin Ivanov, he secretly escaped to Finland. In 1939, 4 swimmers played Monopoly beside a pool, only 4 years after Parker Brothers began selling the game. By then, Monopoly was already a sensation, with nearly 2 million copies sold in its first year. In 1936, 10-year-old Princess Elizabeth posed with the royal family's first corgis, Dookie and Jane. That same year, her uncle abdicated the throne, making her the unexpected future queen. Al Capone tried to enter Chicago's milk business after Prohibition, reportedly using his fleet of delivery trucks and links to Meadowmore dairies. The famous claim that he invented expiration dates after his family drank spoiled milk is a legend, not a proven fact. This is not Hogwarts, but a massive Yale alumni banquet held in the university's grand dining hall around 1902. Hundreds of graduates packed the long tables beneath chandeliers in a building created for Yale's 200th anniversary. On May 18, 1886, Lieutenant Alexander Kovanko photographed St. Petersburg from a balloon 800 meters above the ground. This daring flight produced Russia's first aerial photographs, revealing the city from a viewpoint almost no one had ever seen. This 1903 photograph shows a shepherd's mobile home in Beauce, France. Built on large wooden wheels, the tiny hut moved with the flock and gave the shepherd shelter while he guarded the sheep from thieves and predators. A column of captured German soldiers marches along Moskovsky Avenue in Leningrad in 1944. Months earlier, Soviet troops had finally broken the brutal siege that killed more than 1 million civilians. In Burma, in 1941, soldiers of a British Indian Mountain Artillery unit examine a Thompson submachine gun. Its heavy drum magazine held up to 100 rounds, giving troops devastating firepower at close range. Mentawai women in Sumatra traditionally endured painful tooth filing, performed with a stone blade and mallet. Their teeth were sharpened into points because the tribe viewed this extreme transformation as a symbol of beauty and spiritual balance. William Burroughs stands in a Mexico City police station after fatally shooting his wife, Joan Vollmer, during a drunken William Tell stunt in 1951. Charged with manslaughter, he was released after 13 days and later fled Mexico before his trial. These barrage balloons protected Britain by forcing enemy aircraft higher, where anti-aircraft guns could target them, while their steel cables could tear through low-flying planes. A wartime joke claimed Britain survived the huge buildup of American equipment before D-Day only because the balloons kept the island afloat. On December 19, 1972, Apollo 17 splashed down near American Samoa after the last human mission to the moon. A Navy helicopter from the USS Ticonderoga hovered above the capsule, ready to recover the 3 astronauts and their priceless lunar samples. These Soviet partisans posed with an unusual mix of weapons and captured clothing during the Second World War. The seated fighter beside the woman may be wearing a German police tunic, identified by its pockets, and the missing eagle above the right pocket. On September 23, 1952, Jersey Joe Walcott dropped Rocky Marciano in the first round and controlled much of their heavyweight title fight. In round 13, Marciano landed a crushing right hand that knocked Walcott unconscious and made him world champion. This is the Italian light cruiser Alberico da Barbiano, under construction at the Ansaldo shipyard in Genoa on June 20, 1929. Built for extreme speed with dangerously thin armor, the ship was sunk in minutes during a surprise attack in 1941. The 4 Cascio brothers used profits from a cigarette-holding finger ring to fund their first calculator. In 1957, they launched the relay-powered Casio 14A, a 140-kilogram machine priced at 485,000 yen. A man calmly cuts grass as the Pančevo oil refinery burns behind him during the NATO bombing of Serbia in 1999. The attack released a massive cloud of toxic smoke over nearby fields and homes. In 1957, Paul Anderson reportedly raised 2,844 kilograms in a backlift in Toccoa, Georgia. Guinness called it history's greatest human lift, but later removed the record because the evidence was insufficient. Parisians crowd the deep Lamarck-Caulaincourt metro station during an Allied air raid in 1943 or 1944. Robert Doisneau captured families sleeping beside the tracks, using the underground platform as protection from bombs falling above Paris. Around 1919, radio pioneer Alfred Graebe fitted a car with a receiver and a huge clothesline-like antenna stretched above it. Car radios became practical in 1930 when Motorola introduced one of the first commercially successful models. In 1921, a routine blast at the Opal fertilizer plant detonated about 4,500 tons of ammonium fertilizer. The explosion killed 561 people, destroyed most of the town, and carved a crater more than 100 meters wide. A New York firefighter opens a hydrant in 1908, using a model that remained in service until 1979. Today, the city has about 111,000 hydrants, and parking beside one can lead to a fine and towing. On October 20, 1944, a liquefied natural gas tank in Cleveland failed, sending burning gas through streets and sewers. The explosions destroyed an entire neighborhood, killed 130 people, and left hundreds homeless. In 1969, a street cleaner swept Piccadilly Circus, while young counterculture crowds gathered on the steps around the famous Eros fountain. The image captured a sharp class divide. One man worked as others spent the day rejecting conventional jobs and social rules. North Vietnamese Tank 843 was among the first armored vehicles to break into South Vietnam's presidential palace grounds. Its arrival on April 30, 1975, marked the fall of Saigon and the end of the Vietnam War. On Japan's Ryukyu Islands, some children crossed shallow sea channels on stilts when fishing boats were unavailable. They had to reach school before the tide returned and made the route impossible. In 1915, an Italian Bersagliere demonstrates a Fiat Revelli model 1914 machine gun mounted on a Bianchi military bicycle. The unusual setup let bicycle troops transport heavy firepower quickly, but the weapon had to remain stationary while firing. On April 7, 1917, German submarine U-35 torpedoed the armed British steamship SS Maplewood off Sardinia. The entire crew survived, but the submarine captured the captain before the ship sank. A modern traffic light towers over women in full veils, sitting apart from men on a cobble street on May 25, 1964. The striking scene captures Afghanistan just 9 years before the monarchy fell and decades of upheaval began. On September 11, 1925, officials in Washington watched a strange automobile safety device called the Auto Wing. Mounted across the front bumper, it was designed to catch pedestrians and keep them from being pulled beneath the wheels. The Soviet Tupolev Tu-114 drew huge crowds at the Paris Air Show in 1965. Powered by 4 massive turboprop engines, it was the world's fastest passenger propeller aircraft and could fly non-stop across continents. In 1945, photographer Asher Fellig captured a B-girl waiting for her next customer in a Manhattan bar. B-girls earned money by charming men into buying overpriced drinks, often receiving a cut from every sale. A member of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps poses in Pittsburgh in 1943, wearing the chevrons of a technician 5th grade. The rank gave skilled women the same pay as a corporal while they served in vital military jobs. United States ship Langley became America's first aircraft carrier in 1922 after being converted from the coal ship Jupiter. Its crowded flight deck became a floating laboratory where naval pilots tested the risky techniques that shaped future carrier warfare. This Boeing 314 flying boat offered dining rooms, dressing rooms, and beds while carrying passengers across oceans before long runways existed. Only 12 were built, and during the Second World War, these giant aircraft transported leaders such as Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt. Anne Margaret rides a Triumph motorcycle during filming of The Swinger in 1966. She was a skilled rider off-camera too, and Triumph even featured her in its advertising. Former King Michael of Romania and Queen Anne meet Gregory Peck and David Niven on the set of The Guns of Navarone in 1960. Michael had been forced to surrender his throne to Romania's communist regime 13 years earlier and spent decades in exile. In 1930, Paramount introduced Betty Boop, but her famous baby voice was linked to Esther Jones, a black child performer known as Baby Esther. A court later found that singer Helen Kane had copied Jones's act, yet Jones received no royalties or recognition during her lifetime. At Con Thien in 1967, a Marine wore a helmet asking, "Where is Lee Harvey Oswald now that we really need him?" The dark joke revealed growing anger over the Vietnam War as Marines endured relentless North Vietnamese shelling near the demilitarized zone. Several countries considered boycotting the 1936 Berlin Olympics, but the campaign failed. Hitler's regime temporarily hid its anti-Semitic violence and used the games to fool visitors with an image of peace before restoring its brutal persecution immediately afterward. New York airport security officers use an early X-ray machine to inspect luggage without opening it. The screen revealed hidden weapons and contraband in seconds, transforming airport security forever. Thousands of Japanese sailors form a giant chrysanthemum, each man becoming part of a single petal. The 16-petal flower was the imperial seal, making this formation a massive human symbol of loyalty to the emperor. At 10 at night in 1908, 12-year-old Antoinette Siminger was still selling baskets for 5 cents each after working since morning. Lewis Hine photographed her in Cincinnati while exposing the brutal reality of child labor across America. Jane Russell demonstrates a new safety belt in Las Vegas on July 27, 1951. At the time, most American cars had no seat belts, and many drivers believed being thrown from a crash was safer than staying inside. Rhodesian Special Air Service troops carry captured Soviet RPD machine guns during Operation Urich in Mozambique in September 1979. The raid destroyed key bridges and a major guerrilla base, but 9 Rhodesian soldiers died when their helicopter was shot down. An interracial couple kisses in a Pittsburgh bar during the 1950s, when such relationships still faced open hostility across America. Their simple act of affection challenged one of the era's deepest racial taboos. Brazilian architect Oscar Niemeyer studies plans for the United Nations headquarters in New York on April 18, 1947. His design was combined with ideas from Le Corbusier, creating the famous glass complex that became a global symbol of diplomacy. This B-25H bomber, named Eaton Kitty, served with the 82nd Bomb Squadron and carried artwork painted by Norman L. Harms. Its original name was so offensive that senior commanders ordered the crew to erase it and replace the final word with Kitty. In November 1942, Ivan Belyakovtsev and Mikhail Bessarabov operated a powerful anti-tank rifle from the ruins of Stalingrad. Belyakovtsev survived the war and lived until 1998, but Bessarabov was killed in 1943. On May 14, 1945, concentrated anti-aircraft fire tore into this Japanese Zero as it dived toward the aircraft carrier Essex. The damaged aircraft missed the ship and crashed into the sea nearby. This is the only known authentic photograph of Titanic's swimming pool, taken in 1912. Hidden deep on F deck, the heated pool was reserved for first-class passengers and survived nearly 4 kilometers beneath the Atlantic. Write in the comments which photo you liked the most.